Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for your patience. I know we're getting started a minute or two late. We are actually having technical difficulties on our presenter side. Evan is getting himself gathered and ready to join, but computers restart at the most inconvenient of times for us, like when you're about to give a great webinar to a bunch of amazing people. So I'm going to get us kicked off with a few announcements while Evan gets going and gets joined. Um, and it looks like he was just able to join. I just saw his name pop up, but I'm still going to share and just do a quick little introduction of what I usually do at the end of these. And ta-da! Hopefully you are seeing my screen any second. Again, welcome everyone. I think today is going to be a very busy day. We're going to have a chatty group, I'm hoping, with lots of questions for everyone at the end of Evan's presentation. So as everyone settles in, just want to, again, get a few things going and start with what's going on next month. We know that enhancing the health and safety of fire service professionals is so important and is an investment in the safety and stability of every Oregon community. When we're prioritizing our health and our safety and all of those pieces, we're improving the lives of firefighters. We're strengthening our collective capacity to respond to emergencies, because taking care of your community also means taking care of yourself and your colleagues. So please join us next month, June 3rd, first Wednesday of every month, to hear from Matt Lass about the connection between health and wellness and enhanced community risk reduction. I'll share a link in the chat to that shortly. And then in addition to all of that, again, Evan is going to start talking and tell you all the cool stuff, why you're really here, not to listen to me talk. He's going to dive into some really cool science about wildfire mitigation, and I have a feeling that people are going to be very excited about this, and you're going to want to take it to your community. And so I want to give everyone a chance to, get this information and find out who you, if you are part of an Oregon Fire Agency, who you should be reaching out to after this webinar, connecting you with our fire risk reduction specialists, that team, part of our division, because while Evan is very knowledgeable and super cool, he is just one man, and we do not want you all to connect with him, but rather the first who do the same kind of work. So take a look at this map, figure out who is your person in your region, grab a photo, share the QR code with your friends, colleagues, your enemies, I don't care, because even they should be taking steps towards wildfire safety. And with that, because he is on, I would like to introduce Evan Sluder, who is a research project scientist and engineer at the Insurance Institute of Business and Home Safety. His work focuses on wildfire science, building performance, and risk reduction strategies. His responsibilities include investigating fire behavior and building material performance under wildfire exposures. And I think what is really special about Evan's work is that it helps bridge that gap between experimental research, field observations, and then real-world implementation to improve wildfire resilience. Thank you so much for being here today, Evan. With that, I will stop sharing my screen and let you wave to the camera if it's working now and
Yes.
present.
Awesome. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, yes.
Great. It's a little slow still, so hopefully everything will work here and I will be able to share my screen.
Awesome. If it doesn't work, I have your slides on standby to share them for you, and can do that if you would prefer.
Honestly, we might have to do that just
Okay.
because it is going really slow there. I'm really sorry about that.
No worries. Let me just open them back up and get them sharing. Thank you all for your patience. Again, technology can be our friend, and it's what brings us all together today, so everyone can see it. But let's see. Oop. I'm going to share my screen and put that. Oop, maybe. And don't mind me while I swap. Everybody can see that, I hope.
Perfect.
All right.
All right. Thanks so much, Justine. I appreciate you saving the day through the technical difficulties.
No worries.
Hi again, everyone. Yeah, my name is Evan Sluder. I'm a research scientist and engineer at the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. And yeah, really appreciate your introduction. I'll just go ahead and get started. So if you go to the next slide, please. So I want to kick off with a little bit of information about IBHS. So we are an independent nonprofit scientific research and communications organization that is supported by the property insurance and reinsurance industry. And from our research center in Richburg, South Carolina, we study wildfire, wind, wind-driven rain, and hail, and the way that our homes and businesses can become more resilient to these perils. Our goal is to develop building safety research that leads to real-world solutions and create more resilient communities. Next slide, please. So, in order to understand how these natural disasters interact with our structures and what we can do to reduce our vulnerability, our lab works to recreate, oh no, these disasters at full scale. Um, so, when we are able to test at full scale, we can actually understand exactly what it is about these exposures that lead to failures, and then what we can do to mitigate against those failures and improve the resilience of our structures. Next slide, please. So when we are thinking about the resilience of our structures in a wildfire scenario, we know that we're working to prevent ignition from three ignition mechanisms. So that's embers, flames, and radiant heat. Perfect. And so our research in the lab and in the field has learned exactly or helped us understand what it is about these types of exposures that cause specific components to fail and what we can do to address them. So both of these images are from the recent conflagrations in LA County. On the left there, we're seeing an ember exposure from a combination of structural and vegetative fuels. And on the right is just some image of a spreading fire through vegetation outside a community. Thank you. Next slide, please, Justine. So a lot of our work at the moment is focused on addressing the conflagration problem. And this is also the focus of a lot of the building fire science community. And what we see in these fires is we see areas of extreme fire behavior that mimics the extreme fire behavior that we have observed previously in the wildland, where we see large areas of destruction with pockets of then unburned fuels or structures as well. And generally, these fires are caused and driven by these intense or extreme weather scenarios like we saw with the Santa Ana downsloping wind event during the LA County conflagrations. Um, sorry, Justine, could you go to the next slide, please?
I've tried clicking. I think my computer is now frozen in this.
Oh no.
Um,
So maybe the slides are
oh,
part of the problem.
okay. I think I got it.
There we go. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Next slide after
Um,
this, or is this one good?
yeah, we can go ahead and go to the next one.
Okay.
And to give some context to the size and scale of these fires, we know that within the first 25 hours of ignition, the Palisades fire reached 50% of its final size and 80% of its final size in that first 48 hours. And similarly, the Altadena fire reached, or the Eaton fire in Altadena reached 76% of its final size in 24 hours and 98% after 48 hours. So it goes to show that we see most of our fire spread and loss during those high intensity weather events, that those times coincide pretty well with the Santa Ana wind event that occurred. Next slide, please, Justine, if you can. So when wildfires interact with our communities, structures are exposed through embers, radiant heat, and direct flame contact. Um, so when embers enter, they're normally the first thing to arrive in our communities. And if you could hit the next button on the slide there, Justine. Um, and they are capable of igniting structures themselves or interacting with the fuels around our structures. And under fire weather conditions, those are capable of developing into fires themselves, which then are capable of exposing our structures to radiant heat and direct flame contact, leading to high intensity exposures. Next slide, please. Or next progression on this slide. And again. So when we see fires enter our communities and begin to spread from structure to structure through more of these urban fuels, we've identified that there's aspects of our communities and how structures and other combustible items are laid out within the community that impact how we see fire spread and the intensity of fire spread between structures. And those are structure separation, connective fuels, and our building materials. So a few more clicks there, Justine. Thank you so much. And for each of these, our structure density or structure separation is how close our structures are together. Um, Connective fuels are classically things like fences, um, sheds, other vegetation, and the building materials kind of reflect how much of our how much heat exposure or um, exposure to these different exposure ignition mechanisms our structures can withstand. So our work is now focused on reducing the potential exposures that our structures can experience or will experience, and hardening our structures to the remaining exposures that exist to prevent ignition. Next slide, please, Justine. So when we think about reducing potential exposure and hardening our structures, NIST did a great job of kind of coining these two different dials that we can turn at the parcel level and when we're thinking about our structures. So we're working to simultaneously increase the resilience of our structure through our building materials. So thinking about including a Class A roof or 1/8-inch mesh screening on our vents or non-combustible gutters, while simultaneously reducing the potential exposure that the structure could experience. So that's taking a look at maybe that combustible fencing that's close to the structure, um, the debris or other items that may have accumulated on the roof or in the gutters, and the fuels that are within that first 5 feet around our structure. So whether that's a wood pile, vegetation, or other materials that could be capable of ignition. Working together with these two mechanisms, resilience and exposure, we can come up with practical solutions. Whereas if we focus on them individually, where we only increase the resilience of our structure, the solutions become less practical as we really have to shell out for the best building materials or remove vulnerabilities on our structure like windows or vents or other things that we know our structures need to function properly. Next slide, please, Justine. So our Wildfire Prepared Home program at IBHS is designed and is meant to be a tool that acts as a benchmark for the combination of these two mechanisms, the resilience of our structure and the exposure reduction. And we've compiled these recommendations through our work in the laboratory, our post-disaster investigation, and our working codes and standards. There's two essentially levels of the standard that focus on the three exposure mechanisms that I discussed earlier. So we have our Wildfire Prepared Home Base Standard, which we describe as kind of being the most essential mechanisms that we want to be on all structures that are within areas that are capable of being exposed to wildfire. And it focuses on preventing ignitions from embers, which we know are the most prolific cause of loss during wildfires. They expose large areas of structures in our communities simultaneously at once and are responsible for multiple ignitions. And the situation as those fires develop is generally why we see that these wildfires are capable of overwhelming our suppression resources within our communities. While our Wildfire Prepared Home Plus standard focuses on enhanced protections that give structures benefits in reducing the potential exposure from direct flame contact and radiant heat. So as well as in the base standard, we also focus on that exposure reduction. So we address the potential for fire to spread up to the side of our structure or ignite fuels within that first 5 feet, which could cause those high intensity exposures. So now I want to talk through some key components of the strategy, provide some visuals from our laboratory and our post-disaster investigation to give you some context to the key mitigation measures, how they're effective, and keep referring back to how we're addressing those key factors of community fire spread through the standard. So structure density, connective fuels, and building materials. Next slide, please. All right, so the first concept or portion of our standard that I want to discuss is the defensible space in zone 0. So this falls under the connective fuels kind of section of the community fire spread because it is essentially eliminating any combustible items that exist within that first 5 feet around our parcel. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Could you click once, please? Start the video there. Perfect. And the first one is to address the spreading fire potential to our structure. When we have connective fuels or materials that are ignited on our parcel and they have a direct pathway to our structure, generally we'll see under wildfire conditions that that spread is possible and it results in direct flame contact or very high heat fluxes to our building materials. And even our most resilient building materials have a hard time performing when they're receiving this type of exposure. Next slide, please, or next click, please. Thank you. The second reason is that first 5 feet around our structure is a key area where we're working to address ember exposures. So we know that when embers interact with our structures, that they either hit the wall, the outside of our structure, and fall straight down and accumulate at the base of our wall systems, or they recirculate and kind of accumulate in areas around our structure. Where you would normally see debris or other items accumulate during a windstorm, that's generally where we see embers accumulate. So we're working to reduce any potential fuel sources or things that could ignite due to embers within that area around the structure. And we're also really focused on that area because anything that ignites in that region also has the potential to cause a high exposure to the structure. Next slide, please. So kind of coming through the connective fuels, this gives a good visual as to the importance of that first 5 feet around the structure. This is another lab observation. It was a demonstration we provided to show 5 feet of non-combustible material can go a really long way, even against some of our more intense fire exposures like this wooden fence here. Next slide, please. When we're in the field, there's a lot of different examples of things that can provide these types of exposures within the first 5 feet that are really important to address and mitigate. Fences, even when it's just the gate that's combustible, still capable of providing significant exposures. We see a lot of examples of vegetation, particularly when they're located on mulch beds or underneath vulnerable components like windows. During the Pacific Palisades fire, it was trash day. So unfortunately, there were a lot of very full trash bins located near structures, which resulted in high intensity exposures. And of course, synthetic lawn and mulch, other ground cover materials that are capable of harboring and then allowing for fire spread, provided pathways for fire to move through yards and between properties. So most of these instances, we're able to capture these because of firefighter intervention. They kind of stop failures while they're happening. So kind of freezing time so we can understand what was happening, how these types of failures progress, and learn from them and try and recreate these types of exposures in the laboratory. Next slide, please. While we were in LA County, we were able to do a detailed investigation on around 250 structures where we took a look at the impact of fuel coverage within that first 5 feet around structures, and we're able to quantify that there is an impact on survivability and potential for damage or loss when we have higher fuel loads within that first 5 foot region. The next step for this is to hopefully scale this up either using satellite imagery or data collection on future fires to really begin to understand and quantify the impact of this fuel loading. Next slide, please. So When we think about our building materials, a key concept that we consider is the exterior envelope. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're really focused on addressing the fire exposure from embers, direct flame contact, and radiant heat. And our exterior envelope of our building, the materials that make up the outside of our structure, are our resistance to those exposures. We know that unfortunately, if structures do ignite during these fires, it is very likely that they will be a total loss because they become dependent on firefighter intervention in order to remain standing or survive that fire exposure. So we spent a lot of time investigating, these exterior envelope building materials and the types of failures that we see in the laboratory. When it comes to windows, claddings, and eaves, we know, for instance, that double pane tempered windows provide the most resistance to these exposures, but it also takes a good amount of trying to understand how we could reduce the potential exposure. We've observed recently that instead of breaking, panes actually have the capability to just fall out under high heat exposures and high wind speeds. So to address that, spending more time looking outward from the structure and really focusing on potential exposures and how to address those. Similarly with cladding and eaves, combustible cladding and eave material, when given high heat exposures, can ignite and sustain fire spread, and that wall to ground interface with ember accumulation. Next slide, please, Justin. So these are examples of those failures in LA County. Thankfully, again, firefighter intervention was involved in all of these, but windows where the sash itself is coming out due to that high heat exposure, connective fuels exposing cladding and eaves, and ember ignitions at the wall interface where we have combustible materials all the way to the ground. Next slide, please. Vents are another key portion of that exterior envelope, and one that we often see overlooked. But the video that you're seeing now is quarter-inch mesh screening. And essentially what that's doing is allowing embers inside the structure that have enough size or energy that they can continue to burn as they reach the ground. Mitigating that exposure through reducing the size of that mesh, so 1/8-inch metal mesh screening, reduces that ember size, reduces the energy, and prevents that ember from being able to ignite anything after it has passed through the vent screening. Next slide, please. We saw in the field that it was less than 6% of surveyed structures in the CAL FIRE DINS data and less in the Eaton Fire, and less than 10% of the Palisades had this metal mesh incorporated. So anticipate that embers played a large role in initial ignitions of these structures. Also, because there was evidence of internal ignitions that had been suppressed, but they were quite visible across or during our deployment. Next slide, please. Even with our resilient building materials, it's really important to consider the maintenance with these materials as well. So gutters are a common area where we see a lot of debris accumulation and the potential for ignition. Next slide, please. In LA, where we saw compliant building materials, including a non-combustible roof system with a metal gutter, result in a failure there due to the accumulation of debris and an ignition in that gutter system. Next slide, please. And a couple clicks, I believe. But we were able to observe the impact of building materials in the CAL FIRE DINS data that looked at all the structures within the fire perimeter. As we increased the number of resilient building materials incorporated across structures from 2 to 4, we saw a 20% increase in the likelihood of that structure being undamaged, which is a great statistic to show because this also doesn't account for the fact that there's more opportunity there to reduce the likelihood of damage through incorporation of fuel mitigation around structures. It was not very common that we saw or structures that had mitigated fuel around that first 5 feet of that structure. Next slide, please. And finally, I want to talk about structure separation. So a key focus of our work right now is to, one, understand the type of heat exposures that are possible when we're working in this wind-driven fire spread scenario where we have the ignition of structures under these high wind conditions. Really trying to understand what building materials need to withstand so we can develop our strategies for community mitigation and fire spread. We're also using these experiments to help inform other scientists that are working to model and better predict how these fires might spread. So it's a lot of work going into understanding, one, those exposures, the impact that building materials have in resisting the potential for ignition in these scenarios, and working to better design our communities to resist these types of exposures. Next slide, please. What we've learned that as the distance between homes decreases, we see the likelihood of different damage types increasing as our structures get closer and closer together. And what this work really emphasizes is that a key component of resilience is community mitigation and considering different groupings of structures as a single point of mitigation. So more buy-in and more mitigation at the community scale goes a really long way in addressing these fire exposures. Next slide, please. We were able to investigate and observe these impacts at the Palisades and Eaton fire. So this is structure separation data and wind direction, which showed a clear relationship between the downwind condition being the worst case scenario and a positive impact in terms of damage when it came to increasing structure separation distances. Next slide, please, Justine. This was not as clear as a relationship in the Eaton fire. And we have a hypothesis as to why that is primarily, well, the wind direction wasn't as consistent in the Eaton fire, so much more difficult to define that downwind direction. And there was also a lot of local topography that influenced the wind direction and which way the most intense exposure was being pushed. But we were able to, again, identify the impact of that structure separation distance in the upwind and crosswind directions. Next slide, please. All right, so to reiterate kind of what we've just discussed and what this tells us about our collective efforts to increase risk reduction in these scenarios at the parcel and the community level. We need to focus on preventing ignitions. Every ignition of our structures that we can prevent, especially at the early stages of our exposures, creates significant differences on the downstream impacts during these fire scenarios. So reducing ignitions of our structures is key in mitigating the conflagrations we have seen in recent years. And I wanted to give a link for folks that are interested in accessing our Wildfire Prepared Home Standard. That's the next slide, Justine. That QR code is available to scan, and then whenever you think is good, there's another QR code on the next slide with access to our LA Conflagrations paper if anyone's interested in diving more into the work that we did there. So thank you all very much for your attention today. I really appreciate it, and I apologize for the technical difficulties.
You are not to blame. I will blame a technology company that I won't name because I don't want to get sued. If anyone needs me to bring the QR codes back up, please do let me know, or I can shoot them after. I also recognize that we are at the half-hour mark, but because we started a few minutes late, if you're able to stay on and have questions for Evan, please do so. I will start by saying thank you again so much, Evan, for doing this.
Of course.
So So incredible, so knowledgeable, and so grateful to have your expertise. I will open the floor to others for questions before I jump in with mine. Please, I will make sure that you can just unmute yourself. So jump right in. Email the links to the attendees. Yes, I can totally do that after the session when I do the recording share out as well. Please feel free to just unmute yourself to ask questions of Evan. Oh, we have one in the chat. Brandon Southard asks, what material should we use for sealing low-level decks? I assume some like sheet metal of some kind to reduce the risk of combustion.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to deck systems, if you're talking about sealing under the deck system, we actually recommend the 1/8-inch metal mesh screening with some framing behind it to prevent that because it is kind of flimsy at the 1/8-inch metal mesh level. But Wildfire Defense Systems has or Wildfire Defense Mesh has some great examples of folks that have framed out underneath their deck and then gotten that mesh under there. So it's a matter of just cleaning out underneath that deck and then um, framing around the exterior to keep other embers or materials from blowing in. If you're talking about under the walking surface, which would be probably the most effective way to mitigate spread, but is not always the most cost effective. But yeah, we have actually tested doing a sheet metal under the walking surface, directly under the walking surface, and that does a great job of preventing um, ignition or spread on that walking surface, just because it eliminates the airflow from under the deck system and prevents burning of the walking surface.
Very cool. There was also a question about protecting eaves if enclosing is not an option.
Absolutely. So yeah, if enclosing eaves is not an option, the best thing to do is first address the ember ignition potential. So I mean that's your eave vents, but it'll really just be looking outward. So what potential exposures could those eaves experience? In our base standard, we don't require closing eaves. It's mainly a focus on that first 5 feet around the structure, so you're not getting anything igniting right under that eave and that direct flame contact, which is one of the highest exposures um, you could get. But also taking a look further out on the parcel or maybe your neighbor's house, depending on the structure separation distance. It's just working to prevent those high intensity exposures to those eaves. Um, if you're not if not fully enclosing them, but some mitigation is also an option. The California WUI code um, puts non-combustible material under the eave surface, so just kind of preventing or adding a non-combustible layer to the bottom side of that eave is also an option.
Heidi has a great question, and I love it. If you're willing to come off mute, Heidi, please do so. But how do we balance? We need more affordable housing with housing density,
Mhm.
and how this has an impact on that proximity piece.
Absolutely. So I was trying to allude to this in the structure separation discussion because this is one of the most difficult challenges, especially in our existing communities, because we have so many unmitigated structures in close proximity to each other. Um, and the answer is, we need to start looking at our community kind of as something that needs to act together to achieve the level of mitigation that we want. So, um, for instance, if we have structure separation distances on the order of 10 feet, I live in Portland. That's kind of what I'm working with here. Um, so when I look at preventing or reducing the risk to my house, I'm looking at myself and my neighbors on the block that we live on. So all the houses on my street here, the more of my neighbors that I can get engaged and reducing the likelihood of ignition of their structures, the lower my risk is. So we can kind of take that concept into housing density with our future construction, just kind of building these mitigation measures into our building code so we can develop a high density without increasing that risk. Um, And we're beginning to see that happen. Um, R327 was recently adopted in Deschutes or in Bend and in Deschutes County, so that's really exciting. But that code level adoption of mitigation, where we start to um, incorporate these mitigation measures at scale, allows us to continue to have high density housing.
And one thing you said, Evan, that I think really strikes me on this same point is, having communities look at this as a community problem. One of the things that OSFM does is defensible space assessments, and people can have their homes assessed. I was recently down in Ashland and was talking with the CERT team down there who do community defensible space assessments and work together and walk around the neighborhood as a whole. And I think connecting with your communities as not just like individual assessments, but saying, hey, ask your neighbors if they would also like one, and getting them to get their community involved is a great opportunity there.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Brandon has questions about the types of double pane tempered windows that you suggest. Steel frame versus vinyl frame has been sort of an industry standard in Salem.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I will say vinyl frame is definitely the most common that we see. And a non-combustible frame does offer another level of resilience. But when you start to get to steel or fiberglass or some of these other window systems, the price goes up a lot, and there's also um, energy concerns with the windows as well and the material they're made out of. So it is a challenge, and I think it kind of goes back to the Eve question that we discussed earlier. And I want to clarify as well, the vinyl frame window failures that I showed earlier, they were failing during our structure separation experiments. So this is with a fully involved structure upstream under a constant wind speed, which is generally um, a higher exposure than we would get in some fire scenarios, because it's essentially we just have our foot on the gas the whole time. It's not oscillating or kind of giving breaks in that exposure, but so it is kind of like the most intense exposures that are generating these failures. So I don't want to come out and say that double pane tempered vinyl windows are not a good resilient option. They definitely are. But it just comes with the thought of um, none of our building materials are kind of invincible. It always comes with that we still need to look outward at the area immediately surrounding our structures and address that as well. But I can say that the most resilient window system that we have seen has been a fiberglass double pane tempered window. But um, it was 500% of the cost of a double pane tempered vinyl window.
Not
So not
necessarily
a
affordable.
super practical solution, unfortunately.
Pat, I think I saw you on mute. Please feel free to ask a question.
Yeah. So for existing structures, wood structures and wooden decks, how useful are the new paints and stains coming out on the market that are supposed to be fire retardant?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So unfortunately, we haven't seen any of those materials perform um, in the aging scenario. So most of the time, directly after application, they perform as advertised, but very quickly after, depending on the conditions. So um, a lot of like trying to think of the specific, um, a lot of these materials that are advertised, like either you have your intumescent or your gel paints or applications generally. The intumescents, they rely on a reaction to occur where um, they grow in size and provide like a high insulating layer where they prevent ignition of the material because they raise its thermal resistance. Um, we haven't seen those intumescents perform well after they have been exposed to the elements for like on the order of a month, some on the order of a couple days, weeks. So difficult to quantify exactly where that performance falls off and whether or not we can rely on that. The gels are actually reliant on the moisture within the gel itself when it is applied. So after it's applied, it can be effective, but especially in wildfire conditions where we have very low relative humidities and it's dry, we see that water evaporate from the material. And then the medium that they use to apply that material to your fence, your deck, your house, actually becomes an accelerant. So we've seen that it works against us in the sense of it actually makes these materials easier to ignite. We have a paper that's been published on that that's available on our website as well if you're interested in looking at the study that's been done there.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you, because as we do wildfire assessments, people ask, okay, I got this deck, this cedar deck. What can I do to decrease its risk of catching fire?
Absolutely. And the recommendation that we make is just extending that first 5 feet non-combustible region around the deck and screening underneath of it if possible, just preventing those direct flame contact exposures.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks for the question, Pat. I see another question from Brandon asking about placing sprinklers on their home's roof or on the ground close to their homes during a wildfire.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this has been a challenging one for us as well because there have been examples of folks pointing to them as a solution, and they're a tempting active solution there for mitigation. But we have done some limited testing of the sprinklers to structures in the wind-driven scenario, and we found that it's really, really challenging to actually get the sprinkler spray pattern coverage in a wind-driven scenario. While I was in graduate school, I actually got to witness the testing to do sprinkler spray patterns and understand how the water goes and how it actually gets to flames or gets caught cooling the hot gases coming from the fire. And we're just getting to the point where we can predict where the water goes inside in structure fires. But when it comes to these wind-driven fire events and active fire weather where we have those low relative humidities, again, quickly drying anything that's being sprayed, we don't recommend them as an active solution because they're dependent on infrastructure to continue to run. And we also can't rely on them to provide full coverage of our structure. And they're also actively draining a resource, which is more available in some areas than others. But yeah, so we don't recommend sprinklers as a solution just because they're an active system. They're dependent on that infrastructure. And if we start to lean on that or rely on that too much, we're not doing the passive mitigation measures where we're actually hardening our structure and reducing the exposure, it's not a reliable solution.
That makes sense. I think I am going to call it for all of us because I want to be very respectful of Evan's time and all of yours because I know that this has gone longer than most of you anticipated. For those who stayed on, thank you so much. And Evan, thank you so much again for taking the time. So appreciate it. This recording will be available to you all both on our webinar page as well as I'll be sending a follow-up email to all registrants. So don't worry, you can watch this again. You can hear all of Evan's incredible words over and over and over.
Oh, goodness. Cool. Well, thank you everyone so much. I really appreciate it. And thanks, Justine.